Everybody, welcome to Monster Territory, brought to you by the Foul Territory Network. We have a very special guest, Chris Cotillo. Welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate that, my friend. And first question of the day. Do we have our future shortstop for the Red Sox? Rafi Devers taking ground balls at shortstop yesterday. What's going on there?
Yeah, I was not there, but I saw the video. And, early in the year when he was taking reps at third base, someone told me it was about him just, keeping the same pregame routine, doing some conditioning, getting on his feet before games. He did it in, Texas and Baltimore on that first road trip. And then he kind of stopped. And so yesterday, of course, it's a big story whenever we see him with a glove because we haven't seen that in game action. Obviously he's at short, and Tom Caron had a facetious tweet about, look, he's near first base with a glove, wearing like a kid's glove off in foul territory. So I think people took it a little bit more than they should have, but status quo there. And I don't think he's going to be playing short as much as Trevor Story has struggled for the last 6 weeks or so. I don't think that one's an option.
I'll be honest. I actually did look at the glove, and I zoomed in. I'm like, is that a kid's glove? And I'm thinking, did he just get that from Target down the street? I don't know.
Yeah.
But speaking of Rafi, on a serious note, right? That's been a big talking point this entire year. After Tristan Casas went down, Rafi, could he take over at first? That whole thing blew up. Greg Breslow asking him to play first base. Cora seemed kind of split on the whole thing. Have you heard any sort of an update with that? Or is it kind of the same, status quo?
Yeah, we wrote on Friday that, there's a growing contingent in the Red Sox organization that, a lot of people don't think that this is going to happen. I had one person tell me the other day, he's not playing defense this year. I had another person later on say, there might still be some hope. But I think the way they're looking at it right now, they didn't even approach him about going to play third. They immediately called up Meyer, which was a bold move, of course, to move him to a position he's not familiar with. And at first base, they can roll forward with Abraham Toro, who's the reincarnation of Babe Ruth right now, and Romy Gonzalez, who is obviously back. And I think that can get you to the deadline in a perfect world. And if they're playing better, they're in contention, maybe they go and try to get a real upgrade, a real starter over those guys. But I don't think they're counting on it. I don't think they're counting on Devers, playing those positions, either one. If we get there this afternoon and he's actually taking ground balls at first base, the reality of the situation is if he goes to them and says, hey, it's been almost a month, I've sat on this, I've thought about it, let's try it, then, my two reactions are, well, this whole story has changed and they might be willing to try it. And the other thing is, every day that doesn't happen, it's, kind of a waste in a way, because if you were going to do it now, why not do it, on May 9th or May 7th or whatever it was. So my guess, the betting odds are on him sticking with DH. He's obviously produced at a great level. I think the fact that Meyer looks comfortable at third and that Toro has played well at first and Romy's now healthy, that kind of ruled out the whole Christian Campbell thing over there. And I think it makes him feel a little bit better. Obviously, Yoshida is still not in a spot where he's close to returning. They shut down his hitting program along with the throwing program, so that stalled everything. He's in a weird place of being really slow. Yeah. Do you want to bring up Roman Anthony to be a DH in the major leagues? Probably not. If there was a perfect solution, I think we would have gotten there, but my guess is no for now. Of course, it takes one knock on Alex Cora's office and him saying, let's do this for that to change. But if I were a betting man, and I am on other sports, mostly golf, I would say probably not.
Do you think that could be something maybe after this season? Have you heard anything about that, where maybe down the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to tell. I mean, you look at the infield from a, big picture, or the corner infield from a big picture standpoint past this year. The way Alex Bregman was playing, he looked like a guy who was going to opt out and cash in, whether here or somewhere else. The injury obviously changes things, but if he comes back, I don't know, total guess, around the All-Star break or right after, and then has an unbelievable second half to go with an unbelievable April and most of May, he still could get a pretty big deal. Teams know who he is. It's not like a breakout star. It's a guy who looked like he figured something out over the first 6 weeks. And if he's hot again down the stretch, you could see him opting out. That leaves third base open, whether for, Meyer or whatever. Story's future, obviously, murky, even though that contract it has a lot left. I don't think he's going to opt out, but the Red Sox might decide, time to move on and make a tough decision. Campbell at second, seems like the incumbent there. And Casas, right? Like, you don't know, what you're going to get out of him when he comes back. He's still in his early 20s, still has all the potential in the world, but now he hasn't proven it over the course of a couple seasons, and the injuries have been huge. So I think those conversations will obviously wait. There's a lot up in the air in the middle of the season. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of different things tried out. It'll be interesting to see. Do they pursue a corner infielder over the offseason if Bregman leaves and Casas is slow recovering? Do they think about, if Bregman leaves, putting Devers back at third? Like, these things cannot be ruled out. I mean, the Bregman thing was a one-year deal. People looked at it as a long-term thing. It wasn't. It's a one-year deal with opt-outs. You have to approach that as you're going all in for 2026, and the decisions are for 2025, and the decisions are for 2025, and that's what it was with Rafi along the way here.
Yeah, and I want to bring up one name that you just mentioned earlier. It's the hottest name in it feels like all of sports, at least to me. I'm only focused on baseball, but Roman Anthony, right? I mean, this guy, he's having an amazing season down at AAA. The numbers are off the charts. The metrics are off the charts. I mean, it's gotten to the point where they're having to stuff him in a Yankee bin. I don't know how the heck they got a Yankee bin for the Woo Sox, but they're hiding him in there.
They're in Scranton. That's what they got.
Right. And they're stuffing him in there, bringing him to the bus, to get by people. I mean, very simple question. When the heck is Roman Anthony coming up, and what is going on here?
I have no idea. We just talked about this on our pod, the Fenway Rundown, by the way. And Sean McAdam and I both, are targeting that West Coast trip in a couple weeks. They're going to Seattle, San Francisco, and Anaheim. They have a history of breaking in their best prospects on the West Coast for some reason, whether, they think it takes the pressure off, whether, I don't know what it is. Excuse me, but they did that with Benintendi, Devers, Bogarts dating back some time. Obviously, we saw Campbell on opening day on a different boat, and Meyer in the middle of a doubleheader at home, which was a kind of an emergency situation. But, you kind of look at each series, and there's reasons why that I think they're leaning on. This series against the Angels, you're facing two tough lefties.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the time to do it. You get to the Bronx, and I think they're facing at least one lefty there, but the Red Sox-Yankees series, is that the time to do it? I know guys have done that in the past, but, they're trying to find the perfect time to break him in, and they also feel like, they didn't have a solution at second base. That's why Campbell made the team. He was way better than Hamilton and way better than, obviously, Von Grissom and guys like that. When Bregman went down, they didn't have a better option than Meyer at third. He's the guy who could plug in. Now, they have Rafaela playing great defense. They have Duran and Abreu in the corners, and they have Devers entrenched at DH. So I think the positional thing is real. There's obviously always service time and arbitration considerations to all of this. And I think also it's, fraught with peril to think that Anthony can come back or come up and save the season. We've seen time and time again that prospects shouldn't be asked to do that. If you looked at kind of in a vacuum what the month of May was for Campbell and what Meyer's given them at the plate so far, you'd be like, wow, these guys are really struggling, from a start perspective. There's an adjustment period. So it'll be soon. I don't think we get to June 1st or July 1st, excuse me, and this guy's still at AAA. But, they have some insulation there. The same thing, though, if an outfielder, fouls a ball off his knee tonight and goes in the IL, Roman will be there tomorrow, and that's just kind of the reality of where they are. As Cora said, not knocking down the door, but knocking through it or something like that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, and I and myself, and I think many others, should not expect Roman Anthony to come up here and save the season. I think a lot of people look at Jackson Merrill from last year and just what he did, and he put that Padres team on his back, for a lot of that season. So I think a lot of people think to that, but people got to remember he wasn't, brought in to carry this Padres team. They put him at the bottom of the order, and he just went off, and he was going crazy, and then he just emerged as the player that he was. Another interesting thing you just brought up there, wasn't Pedroia's first series against the Angels on the West Coast, or am I wrong?
So, yeah. No, that feels correct. Yeah.
That's so funny that you just said that. I'm like, wow, you know what? That's very true. Anyway, but for the Red Sox, it is, a lot of expectations coming into this year. Obviously, we talked about Bregman. You traded for Crochet. You made some other moves with Chapman, Bueller, Justin Wilson. And, after that bumpy start, the first five, they got themselves right in April. But month of May, 11-17. They've lost 13 out of their last 20. They haven't won 3 in a row going back to late April now. You're in the clubhouse, it seems like pretty much every day. What is the energy right now that you're feeling in this clubhouse? Is it similar to these prior years where there's been down years, or are you feeling any optimism within the clubhouse? Kind of what sense are you getting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a group that has not done a phenomenal job of blocking out the outside noise and the kind of daily drama, and that's not all to blame Devers, because I'm of the mind that it's a very nuanced thing where you can side with the Red Sox, you can side with Devers on this, and I see both sides. No matter what, no matter who you side with, and again, I find myself on different days feeling different ways about it.
Yeah, same.
It's a distraction. And it's one that I think has been shown on the field in whatever ways. Like I know it's hard to imagine like, oh, these guys are thinking about this on the bus ride and then they get out to the field. It's just, it's an energy kind of feel that you feel in that clubhouse. And that's been the case for the course of a month now. I think the underrated story on this whole thing, beyond, if guys are reading too much or listening too much or not blocking out the outside noise, is the starting rotation's been a massive disappointment. People were talking about at the beginning of the year, like, hey, this could be this rotation has some of the most upside in baseball. When you have Tanner Houck doing what he did, Walker Buehler being super inconsistent, Brian Bayo being bad, Giolito being very inconsistent, Crawford, not pitching yet. I mean, we just, again, talked about this on our pod. If you were to tell me behind Crochet, who is the starting pitcher on the Red Sox who has been the best this year, the answer to me is Dobbins, which is ridiculous to say because he was not even in consideration for this team at the beginning of the year. He was 8th or 9th on the depth chart. Fitz was bad last night, but he had a couple good starts. Everybody has been kind of worse than advertised other than Crochet and Dobbins. And that to me is really the story of this team. I felt like they had a good enough lineup with Bregman in it. That was only going to get better once Meyer and Anthony came up. But now it's like, Bregman, obviously a huge loss, some of the struggles they've endured. The starting rotation is a huge, huge question mark. Big start for Bayo tonight to try to right the ship. Houck and Crawford are going to get back, but you don't know what you're going to get from them. And as I said, Bueller and Giolito, very inconsistent. So I don't know what the answer is. Maybe a big-time trade deadline addition, but as Craig Breslow said the other day, it's great what Garrett's doing and Crochet at the front of that rotation, but we can't rely on him to stop a 4-game losing streak every 5 days. Someone else has to step up, and, we'll see who that is. There's been flashes from Giolito. There's been flashes from Bueller, like I said, Dobbins, but they're in dire need of that. And I think that's the story of the season more than anything, actually.
FT fam, you might have a boring, old, crusty, unpretty razor, and it might be expensive. So, AJ, should they consider another option?
Look how cool this is. Look at the color scheme. Look at it. Little sheath to hide the blades when you travel. Works great. I've been using this for a couple weeks now with Harry's. Clean, no bumps, no cuts. Works great. And you know the best part? It's a great price, especially if you use the foul territory code, Scott.
That's right. Harrys.com/foul. Guess what? You can also get yourself a no-risk trial. So if you don't like your shave, no worries. It's on Harry's. They're not worried about it. Get the edge on your shave with Harry's. Normally, the trial set is $10, but right now, you can get it for just $6 at harrys.com/foul. Use the exclusive link, harrys.com/foul, for a $6 trial set.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very underrated part. I think everyone's focused so much on the whole Rafi thing, Bregman going down. Obviously, you have Crochet every 5th day. So I feel like maybe that takes away from that a little bit where people get a little distracted. But no, you're right. The starting rotation, it's ranking right now in the bottom half of Major League Baseball. They got to get themselves together. But that leads me to my next question, and where, could there be, maybe some pressure on the coaching staff here? And a lot of noise has been going towards Alex Cora. Like I said, a lot of expectations for this year. And Alex Cora, at the end of the day, managers, they tend to be that typical scapegoat. With Cora, do you feel like there's any pressure growing on him within the organization or with anyone on the coaching staff?
This is a manager who the Red Sox have effectively hired 3 times, and the ownership has effectively hired 3 times. The first time when they actually did in the fall of 17, the second time when they brought him back after a scandal. A lot of ownership groups would not want to do that. Obviously, Houston wasn't interested in doing that with A.J. Hinch. And then last year, they had to make a big commitment. They had to, meet a very high price when he was going to go flirt with the Yankees, Dodgers, other teams, right? So they've hired him 3 times, which means they love him at an ownership level. Sam Kennedy does, Henry, Warner. We think they do. They don't speak, so how would we know? But the proof is in the pudding there. I think, that is a huge factor where ownership is going to have his back. People say, $7 million is just a middle reliever. Like, they could eat that immediately. Now, it's more about the optics of it.
Right.
There is to hand him, the second highest paid, managerial salary and deal ever, and then, turn around and fire him 11 months later. It's just not something that happens, Right. If they lose out and finish, 60 and 102, maybe, and there's, fights in the clubhouse every day, but, I think he's safe through this year, and Breslow seemed to allude to that. You do have to wonder about, other changes on the coaching staff. I think Andrew Bailey has, we had a great first couple months, and ever since, the pitching program has not been good. And we saw that through the second half of last year, a failure to adjust. We've seen that, over the course of these first 2 months now. What he has going for him is that he has a very, very good reputation across the game, and he's very, very close with Craig Breslow, and they're very aligned on the philosophy. Might be a philosophy issue instead of one guy. Pete Fatsi, it's tough to blame a guy now when you've lost Bregman and Casas, who are supposed to be 2 of your top 4 hitters. But at the same time, this offense had struggles when those guys were both healthy too. So I don't know. It's not very Red Sox-like to fire a coach in season. They haven't done that in my tenure on the beat dating back to 18. They haven't done that under Cora, obviously. But, something's going to give at a certain point. Let's say they lose another one of these games to the Angels and find themselves swept in New York. Coming back home, you wonder what the shakeup is. Something more than Roman Anthony, It's tough to envision. It's a tough time of year for it because you're not too far off from the trade deadline, but you're far enough where the next 6 weeks before the All-Star break are probably going to make or break that year. And the Red Sox have been in a similar position now. Are they going to buy? Are they going to sell for like the last 7 or 8 years other than, 2018 and 2021? And they're right on that line. We're seeing Walker Buehler trade rumors pop up from Passan today, right? So it's a crucial stretch. I don't think they can wait till July 1st to assess who they are. I think Craig Breslow has assessed who they are, and this is the reality of it. They don't have reinforcements coming pitching-wise from AAA either.
Yeah. And you bring up something there. That's one of the big things I want to ask you about. Walker Buehler popping up in Jeff Passan's article today as a possible trade candidate. We are still in a wait and see mode, but we are getting we're in trade season now. We're in June, right? This is when rumors start to heat up. And we got a report yesterday from Dennis Lin of The Athletic saying the Padres are interested in Jarren Duran, right? That did show prior interest prior to the 2024 season. What are you making of this report? Have you heard anything on your end? What's going on with all that? And, and also the Walker Buehler thing today with Jeff Passan.
Yeah, the Padres are interested in everybody all the time, so it's always hard to figure out, what's real and what's not. To me, it's tough. People think they're going to get, one of their top prospects that probably aren't. And that's the other thing is if you're the Red Sox, to me, if you move on from Duran, who was your best player last year, and you think of as a core piece for a couple of years, it opens a spot for Roman Anthony, but you also have to replace that with major league ready talent. Right. If Michael King had 2 years left to control and wasn't a rental or had 2.5, like that would be a guy to go get. Instead, he's a rental, so like they need a major league starting pitcher, a young, controllable one in a perfect world. There's already log jams in other places, and to me, it's just like the Red Sox approach these next few weeks and end up with a bunch of A-ball prospects and guys who pop up on top 100 lists, yes, a lot of those players are going to be good, and yes, I still think Campbell and Meyer and Anthony will be really, really good players. You just can't sell your fan base on hope for a decade. You have to sell them on real results. And so, I think what makes the most sense for them in the next couple of weeks are, big league trades. Well, not the next couple of weeks because nothing's going to happen probably before July 1st, but could be wrong. But big league for big league trades where you give up a part that doesn't fit your roster perfectly and you get something that does, whether that be a first base solution, whether that be, a pretty good starter. They have too many outfielders. They had this, for a while. And I think a second guess is, we had heard at the winter meetings that they considered him basically untouchable, but a second guess is, not trading Duran at the peak of his value over the winter. I think that's something that they could have done to, clear the path, maybe, sign a temporary fill-in type guy in the outfield, maybe somebody from the right side that could mash a little bit. Grichuk, I don't even know how he's playing this year, whatever. He was a guy we talked about a lot. Maybe you do that and you move on from a guy after, a year that was outstanding, but that's really hard to, repeat. He could have 5 really good seasons that are probably not going to be like that. And so it's tough to see his value ever being that high again. It is tough sending a message, that you're going to trade that guy who's become one of the real stars in the middle of the season when you're trying to compete. But as everybody knows, it's an imperfect and dysfunctional roster in a lot of ways where they have a lot of good in a lot of areas and a lot of, shakiness in a lot of others. So nothing can be ruled out. Breslow is ruthless. He's not emotional. He's been good about that, throughout his time here. I think, separating, that doesn't mean all the decisions have been good ones, but he's not afraid. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But, the Padres and Red Sox are always linked to each other, and they haven't made a trade, I think, since let's see, maybe Drew Pomeranz. So
was there one in 2020? I can't remember. Wasn't there something?
Oh, Mitch Moreland. I think they said Mitch Moreland.
That's what it was. Yes,
for two guys that never made the majors. Yeah, Hudson Potts.
That's what. Yes,
Hudson
that's what I
Potts.
was like, there's a guy with a funny name that I can't remember. But I want to ask one more question. I'm going to make a terrible comparison here. This is not a fair comparison at all. But in a way, sort of the urgency right now that I'm feeling when it comes to, like you said, an unbalanced roster, the expectations, in a way, and again, horrible comparison, but hopefully you can maybe see something here. Where I look back at 2004, right? You made that big no-mark trade. You were terrible defensively. You needed to improve there. There was urgency, obviously. Could you see Craig, doing what Theo did back in 2004, making a bold move like he did, one that just shook all of Boston? Could you see him doing something like that to not just help balance the roster, but also kind of send a message at the same time?
Yeah, I think that type of move actually where you are filling, improving the defense with Cabrera and Minkiewicz, like to make your roster more functional, even if you're probably giving up the best player in the deal, like that made a lot of sense for them at the time. It obviously worked. I think it's tougher now, 21 years later, to make big league for big league type challenge trades. You don't see that. It's always that you give up a good player for 3A ball kids. You give up a good player for, a AAA guy who might be good and an 18-year-old who you don't like. It's always these veteran goes for number 10 and number 9 prospects, whatever it is. So it's tough, especially in a league right now where the expanded playoffs makes everybody not want to completely give up on seasons. There's not very many sellers, and that's why teams sometimes opt to sell because they can capitalize on a seller's market. So I do think, I don't know exactly what that trade could be. If you could flip Duran for a good starting pitcher and call up Anthony, I think that makes a lot of sense. I just don't know that, that's possible right now. And I think, I think someone tweeted this today, but the league is not going to be fooled if by, the season Duran had last year. He's a great player. Is he going to produce at that level for the rest of his career? I don't think teams around the league think he is. And so you're not going to get them to pay based on that one season. I think they're going to be a little bit more realistic. So some of the asking prices and trade proposals we've seen floated are ridiculous. But the Padres also do have a history of paying ridiculous prices for things. So who knows? Again, June 3rd, you don't often see a blockbuster. But, Craig's working. We know that. So we'll see what happens.
So I think what you're trying to say is maybe we can go get Paul Skeens from the Pirates. That sounds about right?
I would do Duran for Skeens, yeah.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate that. It's always a privilege to have someone like you come on. Let the people at home know, where can they find you? What's going on with you?
Chris Cotillo, not Cotillo, as much as the Section 10 people want you to think otherwise.
I keep hearing both.
It's not both. It rhymes with pillow. It always has, always will. On Twitter, X, MassLive, and the Fenway Rundown podcast, which we do twice a week with the esteemed Sean McAdam.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Again, appreciate it. Everybody, go have a good rest of your day. If you can on the way out, hit the like button for us. Subscribe if you're new, and we'll talk to you next time.